And I am here to share my experiences with the community as they navigate through their cancer cluster that they have in Fifth Ward, and to just bounce around lessons learned and ideas. You're gonna hear from more experts later, but I just wanna mention that with the community I came from, we handed Department of State Health Services 17 types of cancer that we most commonly saw in our community. And they came back with 14 of those in statistically significantly high rates. And that was much more than we bargained for. We knew it was bad, but we didn't know it was that bad. And so for those of you that are from Greater Fifth Ward, I understand how you feel. I understand the frustration, the hopelessness you might feel with, are we ever gonna get through this? And so the folks we have on here today are going to share with you some of their experience, some over 40 years experience navigating environmental contamination and cancer investigations throughout our country. To date, Texas Department of State Health Services has published 3 reports for cancer, specific types of cancer, and Greater Fifth Ward. And Stephen Lester is going to talk a little bit more about that later, but I want to tell you something striking to me that I find incredibly unacceptable, and that's that in all 3 of these reports, they've yet to look at cancer in children. Now, we know that parts of the community in Fifth Ward have had vapors coming up from the contamination underground over time. And our children are lower to the ground, and they also respirate at a greater rate than adults do. And it's so unacceptable that children have not been looked at. This last week, we submitted a letter to Texas Department of State Health Services outlining some of the concerns we have for the gaps we see in their reports, and asking for them to make amendments and add in things that are really critical to gaining a clear understanding of the community's true health. Okay, so I want to ask if you're on Zoom and you're not on our email list at THEA and you'd like to be, we will be sending a follow-up email with resources presented in this conversation. So if you're not currently on our email list, please feel free to drop your email in the chat. If you want to do so privately, you can send it to me, or you can send it to one of my team members, Tracy Richardson, who's also on the line. And she and I will capture the emails that come through. Thank you, Tracy. I see she just dropped a message in the chat. If you're on the phone and you dialed in, then if you would, please call our office or send us an email at info@txhea.org. And our office line is 281-315-5242. And it's been a while since I've called the office. All right, now I'm going to turn it over to Gustavo. He is going to facilitate the conversation that we're going to have with the panelists, as well as the Q&A that we'll have later on in this call. Gustavo is the organizing director of the Center for Health, Environment, and Justice, or CHEJ. He brings over 20 years of experience in labor and immigration rights organizing, and he joined CHEJ earlier this year in January.
Thank you so much, Jackie. And I wanted to give a special appreciation to you and your team for all the amazing work that you've been doing for so long for our people. And I wanted to also just extend a special welcome to everyone on this call, because you made time to be here with us. And, you know, we have, I would love to be meeting with you in person and under better circumstances. But since these are the circumstances that we have, and this is the technology we have, so, you know, bear with us, and we're all figuring this out together. If you have questions during the call today, and you're on Zoom, feel free to drop them in the chat, and either myself or somebody else from the team will do our best to address them. And if you're on the phone, that we definitely don't want you to feel left out. So we're gonna make time for Q&As towards the end. And so we want to make sure that everybody's heard, and that if you have extra questions afterwards, then I would refer you to Jackie and her team. And we're always here to help support you in any way that we can. So I'm really excited to have some good sources of information, and most of all experience with fighting pollution and air pollution specifically. And the first person is Mr. Charlie Powell, who's community leader from Alabama. And he's agreed to share his story with us tonight and his experience in fighting pollution and fighting for relocation. They've been organizing for a very long time in the 35th Avenue section of Birmingham. Then I also have the pleasure of having with us Miss Lois Gibbs, who is the founder and executive director of CHEJ. And she's a leader of the Love Canal Group in Niagara Falls, New York, where she led a really successful, really impactful campaign to get herself and her neighbors relocated out of a toxic zone up in New York State. So it can be done, and Lois is proof. And I also have with us Mr. Stephen Lester, who is the science director at CHEJ, who is a Harvard-trained scientist who has, I guess, over 40 years of experience fighting pollution. So those are the three folks that I'm gonna moderate this conversation to begin with. And I really wanna start with Mr. Charlie Powell and his group. PANIC, P-A-N-I-C, stands for People Against Neighborhood Industrial Contamination. He's been fighting since 2009 to get relief and relocation. Mr. Powell, could you tell us a little, just, you know, in a couple of minutes, some background about your situation in North Birmingham, and tell us about the fight for relocation there?
Well, for starters, the condition in Birmingham is we have polluters still polluting. And what we have been fighting since 2009 up until now, with all the contamination that's going on there, the plant is still there polluting. What we're asking is to be relocated. They'll put people in jail about this same situation that we got going on now. It's an uphill climb, but I think in the end we're going to prevail. Well, you know, to even get moved, you have to be on the NPL, National Priority List. Now, we've got the councilor and the mayor that go along with us thus far, but now we're having a problem with the governor. The last time we talked to her, she hadn't answered us yet. But some of the talkings out there is benzene, lead, and it's a number of things. And to be able to be moved from out there, you have to score at least a 28. And we scored a 50. That's probably twice the time it is, or we should have been out of there in 2014. But however, they had a guy come through there and bribe some of the people. Later on, he did time behind it. And my understanding is what I don't understand is why they want to keep us there. Now, and the start of this here, lady by the name of Miss Lois Gibbs, y'all know her. She came down to see how bad our situation was. And she said that they needed somebody to be active down there. Well, she was down there, maybe about 70 or 80 people in the room, and it got silent in there. I was the one stood up. Never done this before, but she tells me I'm doing a pretty good job. And from that day to this one, panic was formed. Now, we still got a lot of work to go. And those plants been down there over 100 years. Along with the neighborhood. We are right in the mouth of that thing.
Yeah.
Now,
and
thing about
Go ahead, Mr. Powell.
The thing about that is the plant is keep on polluting, and we still there. You know, it goes back to that old saying, at one time, blacks had a limited amount of places to stay, which was relatively true. But now, what can happen, they can relocate. All we asking for is fair market value of our home and the lease. The plant is still there polluting. Well, we got the health department, I think, going along with the plant because they coming up with all kind of numbers to keep us there. I never understood why they want to keep us there.
And Mr. Powell, Mr. Powell, I have a very specific question, right? So you've been fighting, it sounds like you've been fighting corruption. You've been fighting now all the way up to the state level with the governor. But when the EPA did their health assessment, so they do their health assessment through ATSDR, which is the Agency for Toxic Substance and Disease Registry. What was their findings exactly?
Well, their finding was for us to not have a garden there or eat out of it, and they found several different contaminants there. And then after they found that out, they decided that they will do an emergency cleanup for the people that had the most toxic on their property, which mine was one of them. Mine had, I think it was about 15 times the substance they was talking about that could give you cancer, heart attacks, strokes, and so on. And then they start this massive cleaning up. Now they still cleaning up, but the plant is still there. So we still have a problem with that. And the only problem we have is we want out. And that thing should be an industrial park. That's what we are explaining now.
I got you. So you mean the plant is still putting out the poison, and even though there's a little bit of a cleanup happening, you can't, it can't outpace how much new dirt is actually being put out by the plant.
That's right. And see, when they start cleaning up, they only go down 2 feet. Now you got contamination that's been there for years, centuries, and decades. 2 feet just not enough. And then what they will do is go on one side of the house and clean it up and say there's nothing wrong with the other side. Mm-hmm. Now, that's a new one to me. Something that milk is not clean.
Right. And then, so does it feel like, I mean, so if you're saying the cleanup only goes down to 2 feet and this plant's been there for 100 years or more, do you feel like the health assessment itself helped you or any of your fellow neighbors get relief?
No, then I don't think it helped us at all. What they are doing is putting a patch on it, but it's still there. Now, what they done, they had borders. Well, they was going to only do so much cleaning up because the borderline where you couldn't go here and couldn't go there. Now, I'm all certain that if you got one part contaminated, all of it contaminated. Why would you clean up, just say, a lot here and you got 8 there? If you got 8 lots should be contaminated. And then you got contamination in the house. Now, they hadn't looked at that because we did a study and a test on that, and we came up with contamination in the house. How in the world can it be outside and you going in and out all day long and it don't come in the house? There's some forms of fashion. Then they tell you when your kids out there on their toys, wash them down, wipe them off. You got to do this all day long. That's just like dynamite. Mm. You shouldn't be.
Mm. And so what are some of the ways that this has affected people physically in the neighborhood?
Well, like I said, they are dying with cancer. You got a high rate of diabetes out there, strokes, heart attacks. My vice president that had 4 bypasses and a stent. And a friend of mine, we just buried him the other day. The councilwoman that out there died with cancer. This is an ongoing thing out there. People is not dying of old age out there, not even in car accidents. And stranger to say, they're not even getting killed with pistols. So now what? Or guns or violent out there. They just dying. You know, it's gonna be a heart attack or a stroke. So just telling you something. They ain't got these figures right. And I have a strong belief, and I will never change it, that the health department is up with it. So we got a long ways to go, but we have narrowed this thing down pretty good because we further now than we ever been.
Yeah. And so how does it make you feel that that you are in the situation, both, I think, in terms, like when the state itself is saying, okay, well, we found through this health assessment, we found these numbers that are totally out of the range and they're way beyond anything that's acceptable, that you're still there.
Well, I find out that from those people, it's nothing but a lie. For starters, I've got a sister that got cancer, a wife out of 40 years, she's been operated on, and they done opened her chest up twice for liver cancer and stomach cancer. Now, she was weighing a firm 135, and now she's down to 99. Now, I'm seeing deterioration of my wife, my sister, and my mama died of, she had a stroke. She had 16 kids, and the only time she ever been in the hospital was having us. You know, they'll say some of it go to the your age bracket or something like this, but you're having kids dying like this. Yeah. Then they build a school down there on contaminated soil. Got 600 kids in it right now.
And I want to extend to you my condolences on the death of your mother, and but I also want to say that this is exactly why we fight. It's exactly why we're all fighting. So, Mr. Powell, do you have anything to add before I'm going to go over to Lois in a second for folks here who are from the Houston 5th Ward who are dealing with a similar thing?
No, I'm good.
You good? Thank you.
I'm good.
I will talk to you soon. Thank you for being with us. And if you have any questions for Mr. Powell, we will be able to take some at the end. And next, I want to turn this over to Miss Lois Gibbs, who began her organizing and leadership journey in Niagara Falls, New York, around a toxic site in her neighborhood called Love Canal. After winning a very hard-fought and historic campaign, she established the Center for Health, Environment, and Justice, where I have the pleasure of serving you from. So she's going to share her experience with environmental testing in a full health study conducted at the Love Canal dump site in her former community. So Lois, you've been around for a long time doing this work. What are a couple of learnings you found at Love Canal that you feel are still relevant today?
You know, thank you, Gustavo. It's pretty amazing how much what happened 40 years ago, actually it's 42 years ago, is still happening today. So for those who don't know, Love Canal was a toxic waste dump site. It had 20,000 tons of chemicals buried in it. The vast majority of homes were built around the dump site. So unlike some communities where the homes and the families were there first and the industry expanded, ours, the landfill was there and they built the homes and the elementary school around it. We had 800 families who were impacted by this dump site. 249 of them were in public housing. And that public housing, by the way, to qualify, you must have 5 children. So imagine how many children were actually exposed. They told us when we discovered the landfill, that the chemicals won't leak from the landfill, that it'll stay beneath the ground, that there's no cause for alarm. And we kept saying, well, that's not true, because we could actually see chemicals coming to the surface or smell the chemicals. And so we forced them to do some testing. And what they discovered was, oh my goodness, chemicals actually move through the ground, and not necessarily just with the water table. The other thing that we were arguing is it's not just about them moving through the ground. It kind of makes sense to anybody who's ever done anything in the land, farmers or gardeners, you know, of course things move. But the thing that was interesting is that we said it's coming up into our homes. And it's coming up into our yard. So our small children who are playing on the grass could smell the chemicals evaporating, especially in the hot sunny days, evaporating into that air. And the air for children is relatively shallow. And they said, oh, no. It is a volatile chemical, a chemical that will evaporate. But it's not really going to get into your house, and it's not getting into the air where the children are playing or your yard where you're doing gardening. Well, lo and behold, we pushed and we shoved and we made them do some more testing, and they're like, oh, well, yeah, actually it is evaporating. And not only is it evaporating into the yards and where the children are and playing or where you're gardening, but it was evaporating through the cement pad of our homes and into the air of my kitchen, my living room, my bedrooms, my bathroom. We had 8 chemicals in the air of our home. They were chemicals that were coming from 3 blocks away. We didn't live over the dump site. And today, when you talk to Charlie or you talk to the folks from this community or other communities, it's the same thing. These chemicals move through the ground. Everybody's denial, especially people like Union Pacific, or in our case, Occidental Petroleum. They're in denial until we force them to do the testing, do what's necessary, and then we prove them right. But that doesn't get us out of where we are, as Charlie said. You know, in Charlie's community, they said your children have to be stripped at the door before they walk in, all their clothes off down to their underpanties and their t-shirt, because the ground is so toxic. That's not acceptable. So at Love Canal, we said, look, this is not acceptable. We were a young population, and so we were very concerned about pregnant women and children, because we had a lot of women who were obviously at a young age and beginning their families, and a lot of children as a result. The thing that was interesting is we went door to door and talked to our neighbors, and they were telling us about miscarriages, babies who were born dead, stillborn. They were telling us about birth defects. They were telling all these stories, and we said, you know, we need a health study here. We need to understand what's going on. And we believe once we find out what's going on, and we are right, once again, we are right that people are getting sick, the government or the industry, Occidental Petroleum, will do the right thing. That is what we believe. We all believed it. And today people still believe that. So we forced New York State, again, through pressure, to do a health study. So the New York State Department of Health went door to door, talked to every single person, both in the public housing and in the private property owners. And they found that 56% of our children were born with birth defects. What? So 56% of our children had 3 ears, double rows of teeth, extra fingers, extra toes, or were mentally retarded. They found that women, during the study period, there was 22 women who were pregnant. Of those 22 pregnancies, only 4 normal babies were born. The rest of those pregnancies ended in miscarriages, stillborn babies, or children with birth defects. We believed that now that we found that, now that we proved that it was so, and they confirmed it, that they would do the right thing, that they would come in and say, oh my goodness, just like we were, this cannot continue. We cannot lose babies. We cannot have children born with birth defects. We need to do something. Instead, they went out and did their own health study. They found the same thing we found. 56% of the children had birth defects. 56% of the children had the 3 ears, the same type of defects. Women were pregnant, were unable to carry their babies full term, or had children who had problems. And when we said, okay, we've proved our case, so what are you going to do about it? They said, well, actually, we don't think these birth defects and miscarriages are related to the 20,000 tons of chemicals in Love Canal. And the fact that the chemicals have moved through the ground, even though you can't see them, it's beneath the ground, and evaporated into your homes, and you were breathing it 24/7. We believe that the 56% birth defect rate is due to a random clustering of genetically defected people.
Wow.
That's what they said. And so it was clear to me from the get-go that finding the science is important. I wanted to know. I needed to know what was happening in my community. I needed to know I was not insane when I was talking to other moms and their children were born with birth defects. Or I wasn't insane when I said, look, you know, Michael had another grand mal seizure, and does anybody else, kids, have this problem? And people are like, oh yeah. That I wasn't insane. So I needed to know that for my purposes. But that did not set us free. The only way we got evacuation of all families, the 249 in public housing and the remaining individual property owners, was through protest, through attending every city council meeting with, never missed one, wearing our t-shirts, demanding we needed change, attending every state, you know, sort of run thing the governor went to, going to our legislators' offices, home offices. You don't have to go to Washington, D.C. Went to the home offices and did a sit-in. We said, it's not safe to live in our house. It is not safe for our children. It is not safe for me who is getting pregnant. So please do something. And it was that pressure, that continual pressure on local and state government and federal government by using their local offices, because we were not wealthy people. We could not drive to Washington, D.C. We were white and black, but we were not wealthy. And so it was just all of that, our signs, our protests, different things we did to get in national media, that finally we won relocation. And I tell you, we didn't just win relocation. We won relocation for the property owners. We won relocation for the renters with a rental agreement, with subsidies for utility hookups, for rent differentials, and all of these other things. We won all of that. We got President Jimmy Carter to come to our stage in our town to meet with our folks and give us what we deserve. Now, we didn't want to let the industry off the hook. Like Union Pacific, Occidental Petroleum was responsible for this. They made the mess. They left it there. They knew people were sick. They knew people were dying. And darn it, they were going to pay. And so we pushed the government to say the taxpayers should not pay for this. You need to use your enforcement people. You need to go after Occidental Petroleum. At that time, it was headed by Arm & Hammer. And you need to get the money back. And they did. So Occidental Petroleum ended up paying $197 million for the Love Canal thing. We wanted to go after Occidental. We truly did. But we didn't have 7 years because we felt the life and the health of our families could not wait, which is why we turned to the state to give us relief and let the state then go after the federal government, or I mean the polluter, in this case, Occidental Petroleum, for that. And things have not changed. It's still the same today. You know, in Charlie's backyard, in your backyard, in Jackie's backyard, we worked with Jackie as well, that, you know, it is really about people joining together, speaking out, and making enough noise and pressure on those who can give you what you want to make it happen. The health and the science study is really important information as an individual. It will not set you free.
Thank you, Lois. Thank you for sharing that. I know that a lot of you probably have comments or questions for Lois, and we will, I promise you, we'll take them at the end. Drop them in the chat if you're on the Zoom, or just hang on for a second if you're on the phone. I wanted to pull out a couple of parallels, right, between those two stories that Mr. Powell mentioned, that there's a 600 600 person school being built right now in North Birmingham. And Lois also mentioned the impact that this is having on kids. It truly just doesn't matter, you know, where in the country we are. What matters is who has the money, who has the power. But ultimately, it's up to us to fight them. I do want to ask you, Lois, specifically about the health assessment. When you realized that being right and having the right data wasn't going to solve the whole problem, like what did you feel then, and how old were you?
Oh, I was the ripe age of 27, and I was mad as hell. And I said, you know, all of this, everything I was ever taught in school about if you play by the rules, that you behave yourself, that you work hard, that, you know, you will succeed, was just baloney. It was garbage in, garbage out. And so I'm also Irish. So when the Irish get angry, no telling what can happen. And so that's what happened with me. Thank you, Gustavo.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. I would love to now introduce you all to Stephen Lester. Stephen is the science director at CHEJ. He's trained at Harvard University, and he's gonna share the summary of the environmental testing and data that was undertaken, and then give us his reflection. Stephen, take it away. And you are on mute. There we go. There you are.
Okay. Thank you, Gustavo, and good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to speak with you tonight. I'm going to address two areas of information. One is the environmental testing. I'm going to provide a brief summary of the environmental testing that's been done at the site and what's going on there, and then talk a bit about the 3 cancer assessments that have been done by the state, whatever it's called, Department of Health Services. So with the environmental testing, I think some of you may know that Southern Pacific Railway conducted wood treating at the Houston Wood Treatment Site on Liberty Road from 1911 to 1984. Union Pacific later acquired this site, and they're the current owners. The wood there was treated with a chemical called creosote, which is a mixture of chemicals used to preserve wood, and there was mostly railroad ties and utility poles treated there. As a result of the activities there, a plume of contamination has entered into the groundwater under the property there. There were a number of lagoons on the property. There were above ground buildings that stored 55,000 gallons of drum in each of these 3 different buildings. So these chemicals have leaked, they've gotten into the ground, and now they're moving underground, and they're moving in the groundwater. There's been a great deal of testing done on this property, both the soil and in the groundwater. And Union Pacific has found significant contamination of volatile chemicals in the groundwater and in the soil. Some of the chemicals in the groundwater include benzene, 2,4-dimethylphenol, naphthalene, dibenzofuran, benzoapyrene, vinyl chloride, and arsenic. There's also been significant testing in the soil. Many of these same chemicals have been found there, plus in addition, pentachlorophenol, methylene chloride, dinitrotoluene, benzoanthracene, and other what are referred to as PAHs, or polynuclear aromatic hydrocarbons. So this contamination that seeped into the ground is now moving in through the ground and through the groundwater. And it's moving in a general direction of north and northeast, which means it's moving from the property of the original site, the Houston Wood Preserving Works site. And it's moving north and east, and it's moving off property and into the residential area to the north of this, of Liberty Street. I suspect many of you know this better than I. And this is also in the direction of Kashmir Gardens. So some of the chemicals that have leaked from the ground are volatile, and which means they have the ability to evaporate. Lois touched on this as a problem at Love Canal when chemicals were getting into their homes and into their basements. The same thing, the same potential exists at this site. So that there's a process. Back in the days of Love Canal, we didn't know what this process was, but today we do. This is called vapor intrusion. And what this means is that chemicals that can evaporate and are volatile move through soil. They evaporate from the water if it's in the water, or from the soil, and it moves through these chemicals move through the soil, and they either end up in the basement of a home or in the open air. And so this is probably the most critical route of exposure that exists at this site now. And so there's lots of questions about what this means, and are people being exposed to these chemicals. Union Pacific, of course, says that that there's no indication of a potential for vapor intrusion. I don't know how they can say that, because no tests have been done for any of these chemicals in the offsite properties or in the homes where people are living. So that, I believe, remains to be done. So Union Pacific has done some soil gas testing, but they have not made that available to the public. But the city right now is hiring a company to go out and do some of this soil vapor testing. And from what I understand, they will be doing some testing near private homes. But they need permission to do that. So that's not something that's occurring very easily. There's a fact sheet that summarizes a lot of what I said and provides some more details. We have a very nice map of this underground plume and where it exists currently in this area. So you'll be able to kind of see what area, where this plume exists underground. And I think it will be very helpful. That fact sheet is available through the THEA website. I believe maybe Jackie, you can, or put it in the chat as to what that website exactly is. So now I want to spend a few minutes talking about the cancer assessments that the state has done. And we have a fact sheet that summarizes a lot of what I'm going to say about the cancer assessments as well. And that's also available on THEA's website. So the Texas Department of State Health Services has conducted 3 cancer assessments in this general area of the northeast section of Houston. The first was released in August of last year, the second in January of this year, and the third in March of this year. The purpose of these studies has been to determine whether observed number of adult cancers in the investigation area is higher than expected during the years 2000 to 2016. All 3 assessments use Texas Cancer Registry data on different cancer types. The study areas were determined by using census tracts. The first and second studies identifies 10 census tracts, and they looked at cancer rates within these 10 census tracts. And the third study, the March study released most recently, added an additional 11 census tracts. So they looked at a total of 21 census tracts that encompasses this general area. These census tracts were also used to calculate the total population of people who live in each of these tracts. So for the first 2 studies, the state looked at 6 different types of cancers. And in the third study, they looked at 9 different types of cancers. While there's some variation between each study, or each assessment, I should say, many of the cancers overlap. So the state also determined how many cancers would be expected in this area based on what's normal, or what the normal cancer rates are for the state of Texas. So in order to determine if a statistically significant excess of cancer cases existed in this study area, they compared the number of observed cases to the number of expected cases. And then they ran some statistical tests to determine significance. So they looked at the rates in 2 different ways. They looked at them as a whole, looking at the entire 10 census tract area, and then the entire 21 census tract area. And then in addition to that, they also looked at specific census tracts and looked at the cancer rates in each of these different census tracts, and they looked to see which ones were high and which ones were not. Let's see, okay. So what did they find? in the first and second studies, when you look, there was a significant increase in 4 different cancer types. These included lung and bronchus, larynx, liver, and esophagus. And then and this was just for the entire 10 census tract area. That's the study area. And then when they added the third study in March of this year, the expanded population area, they found another cancer to be statistically increased. And that was a type of leukemia called acute myeloid leukemia. So for the individual census tracts, they also found statistical increases in different cancer types. I'm not going to go through this in a lot of detail. A lot of it, we have a beautiful map on the attachment that shows each specific census tract, which type of cancer was increased in that census tract. So I think it's a nice visual to help you see what the state found in these 3 studies. However, I will say that liver cancer was increased in 9 different census tracts, lung and cancer in 6 different census tracts, larynx and esophagus in 2 different census tracts independently, and then the acute leukemia was in just a single census tract. So, so to wrap up, to just give you my summary and conclusions, several major points come out of all of this. One is on the environmental testing. Volatile chemicals have been found leaking from this original wood treatment site. These chemicals are volatile and they're moving in the direction of the residential area to the north of all this property. There are questions that remain about whether people are being exposed to these chemicals currently and what those risks are. And tests need to be done to determine whether these homes exist, whether these chemicals are present in these homes nearby. Second, with regard to the 3 cancer assessments, it's clear that a good number of different cancers are increased statistically, scientifically in this population, in this study area. It's not clear what's causing these increases. And it's unfortunate, but the state assessments rather, were never intended to determine what might be causing these. They did not look at that. That was an intentional design of the studies. However, I don't believe that additional investigation looking at cancer in this area is likely to provide any greater insight into what's causing these cancers. In addition, we don't know what role environment, genetics, or lifestyle factors might play in regard to any of these cancers. And then lastly, I believe that at this point in time, with the information that exists now, with the results of these 3 health studies, with all this information about the information on the contamination in this property, I believe there's sufficient information for the state to take action in this community. Additional studies, while everything else continues, the pollution, the cleanup, the testing, excuse me, is not the right way to go here. And so I'm going to stop there, and I'm sure we'll have time to answer questions and talk some more about some of this. And again, a lot of this is summarized in the 2 fact sheets on the THEA website.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Quick question. In your opinion, is the 5th Ward a safe and healthy place for human beings to live?
Well, I mean, I think there are lots of questions about what's going on there. The fact that these cancer rates are so high in this community is an outrage that needs to be addressed.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I would like to turn it over to, very quickly, to Rodrigo Cantu to make an announcement. It sounds like he has news from the city. Rodrigo, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Sure. Yes, this is Rodrigo Cantu. I'm an attorney with Legal Aid. I'm representing Impact, which is a community group based here in the 5th Ward, several of whose members are actually here on the phone. And we've been talking about the testing, and this is actually a good time to let everybody on the call know. I just received an email from the city a few hours ago. They sent out a purchase order to a company called Beacon Environmental, which is the company that our hydrogeologist recommended for the type of testing that is needed, given the nature of the contamination, given where it is. It's called soil gas vapor testing. They have tentatively said that they're going to try to roll it out the week of July 13th. So that's roughly 2.5 weeks from today. And like Mr. Lester was stating earlier, we would like for them to test on private properties if possible. So Impact and the community, the residents that I'm working with, they'll be going to their neighbors within the next few days and the next week to get that permission from residents, and then we'll be passing along those permissions to the city and stating, hey, these are the residents that would like for their properties to be tested. The testing would then stay in the ground for roughly 2 weeks, and would, of course, at the end of when it's taken out and analyzed, a report would be generated that would tell us, one, if there are indeed vapors coming up from the contamination, and two, in what concentrations, which is, of course, it's a missing piece of information. And Gustavo, I would just like to sort of add on to that question that you posed to Mr. Lester, if you know, whether or not the Fifth Ward is a safe community to live in.
No.
Very complicated question, but with regard to UP, we know that they haven't done all the testing that they are supposed to. So now Impact, you know, alongside my client, we've been raising Cain about that, and now the city is the one that's actually paying for the testing. And so hopefully within a few months, we'll know whether or not there are those chemicals are volatilizing and in what concentrations. But we always have to bear in mind that because so much time has passed since the chemicals were first released into the environment and allowed to spread, a lot of them probably already volatilized away. So people were not only exposed when the creosote site was actually operating, but they were exposed after it was shut down and the plume was allowed to volatilize. And those measurements were never taken. And so now here we are in 2020 doing our best to see if there is that exposure pathway right now.
Thank you, and thank you so much, Rodrigo. So we have several folks on the call and on the line who are residents of the Fifth Ward, who do work in the Fifth Ward. And I'd be curious, so I believe most of you know Miss Sandra Edwards. And, you know, you've all been listening to, you know, people here talk about what's happening there, but obviously you know best what's happening there. I'd love to ask you, Sandra, just a little bit about your reaction to hearing the stuff about the testing and your reaction to what's been said here today.
Yes, how everybody doing today? First, I want to say to Mr. Powles, my heart goes out to you because y'all are enduring a lot. Y'all going through a lot, and it's nothing being done. And we're going through the same thing similar to that, and we're doing the same thing as you all with our fight. But I am furious to hear how they just let this keep going on and on and on. And they know, and the question was asked, is Fifth Ward safe to live in? I'm out here and I can answer that. No. People dropping like flies out here. And it's not from COVID-19. It's sad because the people are not stepping up to do what they need to do. But if we keep fighting, and Mr. Powers, you keep doing what you're doing, because somebody eventually is going to hear you. This is how we got all this. Wasn't nobody listening to us. And then we kept the fight going. And now you see people are finally listening because this test is proving they're killing people. They're killing us out here. And like you say, it's moving north. When we went to visit UP, they said they hadn't even tested this area. They didn't even do no tests over here, but they have a big old map showing the plume right under Lavender Street. Steady flowing under Lavender Street. So we steady living in a contamination, even though the plant is gone now. They're not cooking over there anymore. But we still paying for the after effect because it's still running under our houses. The vapors are steady coming up under our house. The kids are out here playing in it. My neighbor's kids have the highest level of lead they never seen before. It's no telling what else these kids have over here because nothing is being done. Not enough is being done. And I thank God for Rodrigo and him keeping the communication with the city of Houston and everybody, because we need a village to get this done. We need help from every which way and people to understand what we are going through. We need them to understand this is killing people. This is not no joke. This is life. They're playing with people's life. And enough is enough.
Thank you, Sandra. And we hear you loud and clear. One of the things that we can say for sure, that between the stories from Houston, New York, Alabama, that these companies and these corrupt officials will try to do a whole bunch of different things to divide us, including, and usually first and foremost, they'll use race as a way to divide people. They'll use immigration. They'll use anything they can get their hands on. And unless we form some bonds that are a lot stronger, then we can't win. And that solidarity there that I heard between the 5th Ward and the 35th Avenue that's exactly what we need to replicate in order to win these fights. So I really appreciate you being here with us today. And I wanted to turn it over back to Jackie. I want to thank you for letting me moderate part of this discussion. I'm going to turn it back over to Jackie, and thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Gustavo.
All right, folks, so now we're going to enter into Q&A mode. And if you have a question that you would like to pitch to the moderator or to the panelists, if you would please drop that question. If you're on Zoom, if you'll drop that question in the chat box, and then Gustavo will go through and pull up questions as we go through the remainder of this this discussion. And if you are on the line, if you've dialed in, if we can all just bear together and you know, unmute yourself, and you know, when you find a moment to ask your question, please feel free to do so.
And I can also track the chat here. Lois, a question for you is, how long did your fight take overall?
Our fight took 3 years from beginning to end, and it's very unusual. And the reason it took 3 years is we were the first. So when you're the first, nobody knows how to deal with you. And so they make really big mistakes, and then we took advantage of every mistake. Now they know exactly how Jackie's going to behave. They know just how Sandra's going to behave. They know just how Charlie's going to behave. They had sociologists figure this all out. So it's harder to move forward because they know action, reaction, and they've got it down. And what we have to do is be unpredictable. And I think that's the difference between now. Although we were really actually very unpredictable. We would just do crazy things. And then they would think we were all crazy. And we'd say, yeah, chemicals made us crazy. We're going to do another crazy thing. You know, we would burn people in effigy. And, you know, it was just, we just kept things going. We had a walk of concern with our faith leaders. And, you know, the more you do, the more attention you get, and you name your power person that you need to move, the more likely you are to move.
Thank you. So a question for, it sounds like for everyone is, has there been consideration to apply to the EPA as a Superfund site? Who would like to take that?
I would actually like to welcome, sorry, my dog would like to welcome as well, Rodrigo, to discuss that. Currently, it's under the RCRA program, and so I know there has been a call for it to go under Superfund. I feel like Rodrigo would be the most expert person on here to answer that clearly.
Sure, thank you, Jackie. So Superfund and RCRA, RCRA is the statute that we're operating under. Union Pacific has to get a permit to manage the waste, right? Which doesn't necessarily mean clean it up. And so RCRA and Superfund which is we often refer to by CERCLA. They're sort of they're seen as sister statutes or sister programs because they address similar problems, but under different circumstances. You go CERCLA when you don't know initially who the responsible party is, and you go RCRA when you know who the responsible party is and they're not denying it. And so there's all these standards there. Jackie has so much experience in the CERCLA area. I have a little bit of experience there and am now more familiar with RCRA. The most important thing is to make sure that whatever program it's done under, the proper testing be done. So I'm not sure that going the CERCLA route is necessarily going to get us a better result or a quicker result. There have been calls to look at this and make it a CERCLA/Superfund site. Specifically last year, after the town hall that was hosted by Representative Sheila Jackson Lee. I don't think going that route is going to make it an any faster process, but it's also just not possible because it's under the RCRA program. That doesn't mean that we couldn't see if that's possible or advocate for that. At this point, I just don't know that it would actually gain us anything. It certainly wouldn't be cleaned up faster. The feds would be the ones in charge of the program as opposed to TCEQ. But that's really what my initial thoughts. I haven't really looked at it more in depth, mainly because we're trying to get traction within the context of RCRA.
Thank you, Rodrigo. And for the benefit of folks on the phone who can't see the chat, somebody asked if there was clarity on whether Union Pacific is liable for Southern Pacific's contamination, since Southern Pacific is no longer in existence. And Rodrigo replied that since they bought the property, they also inherit the responsibility to clean it up.
That's right. Yeah, so with regard to at least the environmental cleanup, there's no doubt that Union Pacific is responsible for the cleanup. They aren't denying that. They've been trying to get this permit since the 90s. So they've been engaged with this administrative process for years. Now, if the question goes more towards health impacts, so for instance, a community member who came in contact with the creosote and then developed an illness sometime later and then wants to sue that Union Pacific, that is not my area of expertise. I wish I had a more definitive answer for you, but I would think that no, that they would have inherited the problem as well. I don't know if we have someone on the call who could answer that specific question. So it's really, they absolutely are responsible for the cleanup. And then when it comes to the health effects, if you wanted to sue them, that would be a different type of legal vehicle. And more than likely, I would think that they would be on the hook.
Well, and it certainly sounds like they made enough money off of polluting the Fifth Ward. So it's not like they ain't got it. Broader question here from two different people want to ask about how can we amplify this message? This meeting's very important, and will a recording of it be posted anywhere? That's a question out to you, Jackie.
You bet. So we are recording this conversation, and we have actually had several requests for it to be interpreted. So we are going to have the video interpreted, and then we will be posting it to our blog on FIA's website. I'll drop the web URL into the chat. But for those of you on the line, it is txhea.org. And so I imagine the near future, we will be able to get this as you've seen it today, and interpreted up on our blog.
Yep, and something that I wanted to mention very quickly is that if there is interest in doing a Spanish version of this meeting, I'd be more than happy to do it. I'm from Brazil, so you will have to deal with a little Portuguese accent. But more than happy to talk to folks and field questions and help translate. And please just contact Jackie. Let's work through you, Jackie, about that. Other questions? I am looking at the chat for anything
You know,
that I might
Gustavo,
have missed.
browsing, I think Lois might have 2 cents or a few cents about Superfund or anything you guys are hearing there on the Hill, maybe related to folks talking about should this, you know, or could this be a Superfund site, or is it best under RCRA? Do you have anything to add to that part of the conversation?
Yeah, I mean, it is just exactly the way he said it. It really depends. What is going to get you the fastest cleanup? And if it's RCRA, it's going to get you the fastest cleanup and they're moving. That's where I would stay. But if things stop or get bogged down, Superfund is the other option. The difference between the two is that there's a grants program and there's sort of joint and several liability. So you don't have the question about Union Pacific versus Southern and whatever. But I will tell you that Superfund is not the panacea everybody thinks it is. And I invite Charlie to add to this. Charlie's site in 2012 in North Birmingham, the 35th Avenue site, was declared an emergency cleanup. It was so toxic, it was an emergency cleanup. Then the industry got mad, and you guys got to watch out what happens with Union Pacific here, and I'm sure some folks who are dealing with them already know this, but then the industry got really angry, and they paid off a state legislator to keep it from going from an emergency cleanup under Superfund to a national priority list, meaning it gets full treatment under Superfund, as opposed to just the surface removal of some dirt here and there. He went to jail. Oliver Robinson went to jail for taking this, in Alabama. It's sort of like Texas in different ways, but in Alabama, he got tried, he was found guilty, he went to jail. The law firm that was trying to do this, lawyer went to jail. I mean, 3 very powerful people went to jail. Right now, the EPA administrator, former administrator from Region 4, which is out of Atlanta, is indicted. He has not yet gone to trial because of the pandemic, likely go to jail. The commissioner of the state of Alabama Environmental Department, ADEM as they call it, was indicted. All around this 35th Avenue is all around Charlie's site, because they don't want to pay to clean it up. Charlie, in the meantime, and his neighbors are sitting there doing what, Charlie? I mean, Superfund is not what you think it is, because there's just as much corruption there as there is under RCRA program and everything else. Did I get that right, Charlie?
You got it right. The first thing they did was try to divide up the neighborhood. When I almost got them back together, then they started bribing the people over us. And after they done that, then put them in jail. Well, Oliver Robinson, he out of jail now. They gave him 3 years. And if you got fed time, you supposed to do all of your time. Now, my thinking about that, because we finna protest. You let Oliver Robinson out, let us out. Oh, we ain't through. We just begun. That's what that is. But like I said, this has been an uphill climb, all together new to me, and it's very different. But I'm sure learning as I go, because when you get up in that corporate world, it's a whole different ball game. They just turn their backs on it. Mind you, when I was saying about that school on this north side, they closed down a major hospital and a major clinic. They ain't planning on doing nothing back over here no more. So we don't have a one out, and that's to be removed. Now they got a whole government project. They moving them, and they moving half of the one in Collegeville. Why not move us all? They done spent right now over $60 million. It would have been more economical for them to just move us and make that an industrial park and do what they had to do. Now, however, they was going to have to clean it up anyway. But if you clean it up, couldn't you clean up a clear space than trying to move stuff around, which means we should have been gone. We should have been gone years ago. And back then in 2014, if we had been on the NPL, we probably would have been moved. That's when all the bribery come in. Now, what they are doing, They're cleaning up off of the taxpayers' expense. Now, they could have moved us with that money. I'm a taxpayer. But they didn't. Now, EPA over there cleaning up. Now, they also said they'll be through in 2012. Here it is now, 2020. They said they need 2 more years at $42 more million. So what they're doing, they cleaning up on money, and we're getting sicker and sicker and dying. Yeah. We need relief, and we don't need relief tomorrow. We need it now.
Yeah, thanks, Charlie. I mean, it really is true. The cleanup they're doing is the emergency removal, so it's not even deep cleaning. And it is, and I've seen it in other communities where Collegeville got pitted against Harriman Park, who got pitted against each one of the communities. And they're all primarily African-American communities, different income, but relatively low income. And they hired a public relations firm to divide these communities. That is not unusual. And if you see somebody talking to you about one community over the other, you have to ask, like, where did that come from? Who's paying that? I mean, Jackie had an AstroTurf group as well in her fight in Houston in the Superfund site there. It's not unusual. So now that you are getting some recognition, now that you are getting some kind of public attention, they're going to come and try to divide you and hurt you in different ways, so you cannot be as powerful as you are today. And your power is now growing, but they're going to try to stop that. So look for the signs.
Thank you both. Before we go to the phones, if you're on the phone and you have a question, we're going to come to you right after this one. But I do want to address question from 3 different people in chat. One is Sandra, the other is Willow, and third is Andre, who have lost loved ones. They have already passed. They're residents of the 5th Ward. What mechanism, if any, exists to get compensation for those lives, for those folks who have already passed away?
Well, my experience is they would have to do a class action suit. And the experience with the class action suit is that they will look back at those health studies that were done by state and polluters. They will see that in those health studies, certain things were there, and they did not do it, as Mr. Lester explained. They did not do it to look at the roots of exposure or the cause of the cancer, just the number of cancers and the type of cancers. So they will say that this community has, a predisposition to that because they don't eat right, or they smoke, or if liver cancer, they drink. And I've seen it time and time again, and it's really sad. Ultimately, most of these class action suits settle out of court. They rarely go to court, and generally speaking, they're a nickel. I mean, people get a nickel or a dime. Certainly not compensation for the level of suffering that families go through with losing family members, but also just the struggle to get out and be free of the chemicals and breathe clean air and walk on clean dirt. It's just, it's not good.
And Willow,
I'd like to add something to that too, if I can.
Go ahead, Stephen.
And that is that whenever you're trying to figure out whether a health problem is caused by a polluter or a chemical exposure, the biggest piece of information that's not known is what people were actually exposed to. You don't have levels of chemicals. Often you don't even know what the chemicals were that were in the home or in the air or at the time when people were living in an area. So it becomes almost impossible to prove what's causing the cancers or causing the health problems without having information on exposure. The scientists will all say the same things. We can't say, we don't know. And so it's really hard. It's unfortunate, but it's really hard. And that's why it depends largely on the community to have conversations about alternatives to more studies. That's not going to solve anything.
Thank you. And my condolences to all 3 of you and those who have lost loved ones. I want to turn this over to the folks who are on the phone who maybe can't see the chat on the Zoom app. Would anybody from the phones like to pose a question or make a comment?
I would like to make a comment. I'm Andre West, and I've been fighting against Union Pacific since 2004. My mother, like I said, I've lost 6 family members. And when Impact started up and got really, really heated and hot against Union Pacific, that's when my phone began to ring from Union Pacific saying, okay, if we sent you any documents, can you send them back to us, copies of them showing. Now this been 16 years. So I'm saying to myself, they counting on me not having these documents. But I thank God that I kept those documents and I sent them back to them. And one of the spokespersons called back and said, you know, yes, they are our documents and we don't know how we've let this, you know, slip through the cracks. It's been 16 years. Come on now. It's time for y'all to do something. I've lost 6 family members. So, you know, it's really heart wrenching and it really gets you to the point where you're more furious than anything because it's not about the money because they'll never replace my loved ones. They'll never replace them. And so my thing is, it's time for them to do something. It's like a ghost town for Fifth Ward, you know, like Miss Edwards said, people dropping like flies, you know, and it's really crazy because it's like there's nobody listening. Union Pacific is just not listening. Am I going to stop the fight? No, I've waited 16 years. I can outlast them. I'm praying to God that I outlast them. They're not going to just get away with this. And, you know, I heard the lady said on here that they resorted to all kinds of tactics. Okay, that's where we are, Impact. We're doing everything. We're on the bullhorns. We're picketing. We're doing everything that we can do to shut them down. There's not enough cleaning up that they can do. This stuff been going on since 18, way back when, over 50 decades. Okay, it's not. It ain't that much cleaning up in the world. So you know, it's crazy. It's crazy. But Impact, we have vowed to fight, and we're gonna continue to fight with our
Since
Black brothers and
1911.
sisters, our Brown brothers, our Denver Harbor brothers and sisters. We're gonna lock arms and we're gonna continue to fight. That's what we do. We're gonna fight. We're gonna continue to fight. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Andre. Folks on the phone, any questions or reactions to what's been said here tonight? I think you can just speak to unmute yourself. Or Lois, you might have to unmute folks. Anybody on the phone have a question or comment?
This is Walter Mallet.
Go ahead, Walter.
I'm still trying to figure out, you still continue to use a certain term, and that's cleanup. How can you adequate clean up an area of this immense size without removing everyone first?
That's a great question. I think Stephen could speak to that.
Yes, I think that you're exactly right. They are, and to take a step back, they don't have a cleanup plan here. What they're doing is, quote, managing the waste, managing the plume. They're testing it and monitoring it, and they are doing a little bit of removal, but there's no cleanup plan here. And so after all these years of studying and whatever else they've done there, they don't have a plan. And so it raises the question of, if they're not going to clean it up, then maybe they need to move people if that's what people want to do.
Can I say something?
Please.
Okay, Mr. Walter, you and I know that they just playing with us. First of all these years, there's no way they could clean up all this mess. It's no way in hell, excuse my term, it's no way in hell you're gonna clean up something that's been here 50 years plus. So the only alternative is to get us out of here. The only alternative is to relocate. So for them to talk about it, keep pissing on us, telling us complaining about cleaning up, you can't clean up something that's been here that long. And if you do, it's gonna take our lifetime and our children's lifetime and our grandchildren's lifetime to get them out of here. So it ain't no such a thing as a cleanup at this point. The only point is relocation. So they need to quit playing with us. We not stupid. We might be a little crazy from the chemicals, but we are a long ways from stupid.
And this is Walter again, and that's basically the point that I'm speaking to, because I continue to hear the term cleanup. You can't adequately clean up an area of this size without removing everyone in all of the neighborhoods that's joining and connected to this chemical waste. And so that's my insight, and that's my issue in a nutshell. And we continue to talk about these officials. I'm going to use the pharmaceutical term, what they use in the pharmaceutical world, and that's whiffing. All these people, the term is whiffing. What's in it for me? And that's how these people continue to go on around the problem that we experiencing on an everyday basis.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, let's
go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, there is a language thing that they use, and Charlie could probably reaffirm this, but what they call it is a cleanup, so that everybody thinks it's a cleanup. And you can't, and by us repeating their words, their language, we are communicating to friends and allies that they're doing something they're not doing. And so, as Mr. Lester said, this is not a cleanup. And we, the bigger we, have to stop using that term. That's what they kept using in Charlie's backyard, and everybody says, what are you talking about? They're cleaning it up. No, they're not cleaning it up. They're trying to contain it in different places. So when you're thinking about it, you're exactly right that language doesn't work for what they're doing. And when that happens, stop using their language and ask them to stop using that language.
Thank you.
They can't say to you all or your friends and neighbors, they are cleaning it up, when in fact, they are not. And if you keep lying to my friends and neighbors, we're going to call you on it, right? We're going to do one of those crazy things that I love to do, crazy things. And I also know how to talk to you all about relocation if down the road, if that's where you want to go, how to do it in a
crazy way.
Yeah. Let's and thank you, Lois. Let's talk about some next steps. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. We have 5 minutes left, and I'm pretty sure I speak for everyone that we're not done talking here. And I just want to thank you all again, and let's figure out some next steps, and let's do this soon.
Thank you, Gustavo and everyone. This has been powerful. I was hoping that this would be exactly what it was. And I've been so excited to bring Lois and Stephen, Charlie and Gustavo to the greater Houston region. And there absolutely has to be follow-up. There are needs that need to be met. If you have not dropped your email into the chat box, or if you're on the line, we are going to be sending out a follow-up email that's going to have some of the resources mentioned during this call, one of which is the 2 summaries that CHEJ wrote for us to host, and we're hosting those on a blog on our website, and they're really excellent breakdowns that we can all understand about the scientific sampling, the environmental sampling and data that we have to date. And then there's also a very thorough and easily to understand breakdown of the cancer investigations that have gone on to date. The other thing we're going to be sending out within the next day or two in a follow-up email is the link to the health surveys that we collect at THEA. Now, I learned from experience, you know, with my community that I came from, that the Texas Cancer Registry doesn't work the way most of us would think it would work. You can't just go in there for a zip code or for a community and pull all the types of disease that are in that community. There's not even a registry for autoimmune disease, things like, you know, different heart problems, things that a lot of these communities face, my community faces. And so it's critical that the state looks at as many different types of cancer individually as possible. So for us to do that, we need y'all. All of this is people power, and so is finding out the true picture of the community's health, past and present. And so we ask that you trust us with your health information. One of my team members will be dropping the link to our website, to the survey in the chat box. And we ask that you fill that out, because we will then relay the types of cancer that we see in there to the state. And we will be asking the state to pull the rates of cancer for the full available data range for the types of cancer that we know about, because to date they have not pulled more, you know, than a couple dozen types of cancer. And I think we all know that although y'all are seeing high rates of respiratory related cancer and disease, I think there's probably much more out there. Miss Edwards mentioned, you know, the lead in the children, and this is a complex picture we're looking at. Okay, so the next item is that someone mentioned that they I believe went to an elementary school in the area, moved away, had lung cancer. So folks who move away, it's important for you to either put the information on one of the health surveys about people you know who've moved out, or ask them to go to our website and fill out one of those health surveys, because the Texas Cancer Registry does not capture folks who have moved off and then received a diagnosis. The way the registry works is that cancer diagnoses are captured in the zip code they are diagnosed in. So if someone lived in Fifth Ward or Kashmere Gardens and they moved off and were later diagnosed with cancer, that's information that we need to be brought forward by community members specifically. Okay, I've got several notes here, things I want to wrap up with. As it was mentioned, we're going to be interpreting this video in multiple ways, and we will be hosting it for folks to view at a later date. And lastly, I think that we should take this opportunity to discuss a further conversation. I've heard in this conversation relocation. You know, I've also heard in the chat, I saw in the chat about potential for LBJ, you know, and is there an interest there for LBJ Hospital to do some sort of assessment? And so I think that there's a lot of room for conversation about next steps that the community wants and that the community itself can drive forward. So I'd like to see if there's interest for us to convene again and have these conversations about, you know, how the community really wants to move forward. I'm seeing a lot of nods. So that's a good sign. There's a lot going on in the chat. Obviously, while I'm talking, I can't keep up with all of that. Great. Yes is coming through in the chat. Again, please make sure we have your details so that we can follow up with you all. And I want to thank Lois for your powerful testimony and your experiences, and reminding us that we're not genetically dysfunctional, all living in the same neighborhood, you know, because we get these excuses and it's crap. And thank you, Lois, for telling us about your trials and tribulations. Charlie, for everything you've been through and are still going through and working for. Stephen, for your expertise. And Impact, for being here, for showing up. I love y'all's shirts. It's not easy, but it takes a village, and keep pushing forward. All right, everyone. Thank you. Until next time. Bye-bye.
Good night, everybody. Have a wonderful, blessed evening.
Same to you.
Good
Have a
night.
good night.
Good night.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Mhm.